Jake Matthews never thought his quiet suburban life would turn into a battleground. It all started on a bright Monday morning when he stepped outside his house in Cedar Creek Estates, ready to load the family's minivan for a day of errands. But something caught his eye, a brightly colored notice taped to his mailbox. Curious, Jake pulled it off and unfolded the paper. The words were chilling. Notice of property reclassification, effective immediately. The driveway located at 1422 Maplewood Lane is designated as common HOA property. Private parking or use is prohibited. Unauthorized vehicles will be subject to fines and removal. Jake blinked in disbelief. His driveway, common property? He looked down the quiet street. Every neighbor's driveway was theirs, right? His was where he'd parked his cars for years. This had to be a mistake. He stuffed the notice in his pocket and walked up to his driveway. Sure enough, a new sign had appeared overnight, bold red letters declaring, "No parking. HOA property." His heart sank. This was no accident. Someone in the HOA had made a decision that directly affected him, and not in a good way. "Hey, Jake," called Mrs. Martinez, his next-door neighbor, watering her garden. "Did you see the notice? Karen's been on a power trip lately." Jake frowned. Karen Whitman was the HOA president, a woman known for her iron-fisted rules and little patience for complaints. She ran the neighborhood like a captain steering a ship in a storm, determined to get to the bottom of this. Jake grabbed his phone and dialed the HOA office number listed on the notice. After a long ring, Karen herself answered. "Karen, this is Jake Matthews at 1422 Maplewood," he said calmly. "I got this notice about my driveway being common property. Can you explain what's going on?" There was a brief silence. Then Karen's clipped voice came through, cold and firm. "Jake, the board voted on this last month. The driveway was found to be encroaching on HOA land. You'll need to stop parking there immediately." Jake's brow furrowed. "But I've had that driveway for over 10 years. Is there a new survey or document I can see?" "No," Karen replied, voice hardening. "This is final. If you park there, expect fines." Jake's frustration bubbled, but he kept his voice steady. "Karen, I want to resolve this fairly. Please send me the official paperwork." "We've sent the notice," she said, hanging up abruptly. Jake stared at his phone, the line dead. A cold knot formed in his stomach. This wasn't just about a driveway. It was a power move, one meant to push him out or at least make his life difficult. That afternoon, Jake's car sat idly on the street. When he tried to pull into the driveway, a row of orange cones blocked the entrance, topped with another "No parking" sign. His frustration turned into quiet determination as he stood by the curb. A few neighbors stopped to watch. Some shook their heads at Karen's strictness, others looked wary, fearing to get involved. Jake felt the eyes, sensing the division growing in the neighborhood. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table with his wife, Lisa. "This isn't just about parking," Jake said. "Karen's trying to control everything, and she's making an example of me." Lisa reached across, squeezing his hand. "We'll figure it out. Just don't let her push you around." But Jake knew this was only the beginning. The battle lines were drawn, and Karen wasn't going to back down easily. What would Jake do next? Would he fight back or surrender his driveway to the HOA's claim? The next morning, Jake Matthews woke up to the uneasy feeling that things were about to escalate. The driveway dispute was no longer just a nuisance, it was becoming personal. He stepped outside his front door, coffee in hand, and immediately noticed the fresh addition to his driveway. Overnight, someone had placed a barricade, a bright orange traffic cone, and next to it, a large, official-looking sign printed with bold letters, "No parking. Violators will be towed at owners." expense. Jake sighed. The message was clear. Karen Whitman wasn't messing around. He walked over and carefully lifted the cone, muttering to himself, "This isn't how neighbors should treat each other." Just then, the unmistakable sound of heels clicking on the pavement drew his attention. Karen was striding down the street, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and scanning. "Morning, Jake," she said, stopping a few feet from him. Her tone was frosty but precise. "Karen," Jake nodded. "Looks like you're serious about this no parking business." Karen smiled thinly. "Serious enough. The HOA board has rules, Jake. If you continue to park there, you'll be fined. We all have to follow the guidelines." Jake held her gaze. "I get that. But this driveway has been mine for years. I haven't received any clear proof that it's common property. You're basically telling me to give up my space without real evidence." Karen's smile disappeared. "You're wrong. The board had a survey done. I'm just enforcing the decision. If you want to see the paperwork, you'll have to file a formal request. But until then, follow the rules." Jake's jaw tightened. "I will. But I won't just roll over." Karen nodded as if that was the response she expected. "Good. I'm glad you understand. For now." With that, she turned on her heel and walked back down the street. Jake stared after her, the tension knotting tighter in his chest. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right. He felt cornered down for the first time. He wondered if Karen's motives went beyond just parking rules. Later that day, Jake met with Tom, his closest friend and neighbor, who had watched the situation unfold with growing concern. "Tom, did you see Karen today?" Jake asked. Tom nodded. "Yeah, she's doubling down. Heard she's planning to put more signs up all over the neighborhood. Says it's about protecting community assets. But I think she just wants control." Jake sighed. "It's like she's making an example of me. If she can force me out of my driveway, what's next?" Tom looked serious. "I wouldn't be surprised if she tries to find you out or worse. HOA power can be brutal when someone's hungry for control." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. His mind raced with questions. Was there a way to fight this legally? Could he rally the neighborhood to his side? Or was Karen's grip on the HOA too strong? The next morning brought new developments. Jake arrived home after work to find more cones blocking his driveway this time. 3 of them and a new sign. Violators subject to immediate towing. Feeling the pressure, Jake decided it was time to take action. He began documenting everything. Photos of the cones, copies of the notices, recordings of his conversations with Karen and the HOA office. He researched HOA laws and community property rights online late into the night. But the more he dug, the murkier things became. HOA bylaws were dense and confusing, and Karen's administration seemed airtight. Despite the frustration, Jake stayed calm. He knew he couldn't let anger cloud his judgment. Instead, he started reaching out quietly to neighbors, some who had been silent until now. To his surprise, a few admitted they thought Karen was overstepping. Some had faced smaller annoyances from her before, but most were too afraid to speak out. Then came a whisper from across the street. "Hey, Jake," called Lisa, another neighbor. "I don't know all the details, but Karen's been tough on others too. You're not alone in this." Jake nodded gratefully. "Thanks, Lisa. I'm thinking of calling a neighborhood meeting. Maybe if we talk together, we can find a way forward." Lisa smiled. "I'm in." Just as Jake started to feel some hope, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Stop fighting the HOA, Jake. It's not worth it." His heart skipped a beat. Someone was watching, maybe more closely than he'd imagined. The stakes had just risen. Would Jake back down? Or would he stand his ground, no matter what came next? Jake Matthews sat in his living room, staring at the anonymous text on his phone. "Stop fighting the HOA, Jake. It's not worth it." The message was a clear warning, but instead of backing down, it lit a fire inside him. He wasn't about to let some petty power grab push him out of his own driveway. His wife, Lisa, noticed the tension. "Jake, what's the plan? You can't just keep letting Karen run this show." Jake looked up, determination in his eyes. "I need to make a statement. Something that tells Karen this isn't over, something with a little humor. Maybe if the whole neighborhood gets a laugh, she'll lose some of her steam." Lisa smirked. "You mean like a prank?" Jake grinned. "Exactly. But this one's got to be clever and unforgettable." That afternoon, armed with tape, a giant red ribbon, and a poster board, Jake set out to execute his plan. Karen's shiny black SUV was parked in her usual spot near the clubhouse. Jake worked quickly, wrapping the ribbon around the vehicle like a huge gift. On the windshield, he stuck a bright white poster with bold letters, "One-way ticket to embarrassment. Courtesy of your favorite neighbor." He snapped a picture and shared it on the neighborhood social media page, adding a witty caption. "When Karen takes your driveway, sometimes you have to give her car a bow." The post exploded. Neighbors began commenting with laughing emojis and playful jabs at Karen's expense. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood buzz wasn't about rules and fines. It was about Jake's bold move. But Jake knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, he arrived home to find Karen standing beside her SUV, glaring at the ribbon. She peeled it off with a scowl, reading the note with disbelief. "Jake Matthews," she muttered. "You think this is funny?" Jake stepped forward calmly. "Karen, I'm just saying maybe a little humor would help. We've all been stressed lately." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You're walking on thin ice." Before she could say more, a few neighbors approached, whispering and smiling behind their hands. Word was spreading fast. Karen stormed into the clubhouse, slamming the door. Behind her, a flurry of texts and phone calls followed, and soon an emergency HOA meeting was scheduled. Jake knew the meeting would be tense. Karen was furious, and the board would be forced to address his antics. That evening, Jake sat with Lisa, wondering if his stunt had crossed a line. "Think I went too far?" he asked quietly. Lisa shook her head. "No. Sometimes you need to shake things up to break the tension." You made people pay attention. As the meeting day arrived, the community center filled with homeowners. The atmosphere was charged equal. Parts curiosity, excitement, and unease. Karen wasted no time. "This kind of behavior is unacceptable," she declared, eyes blazing at Jake. "He's disrupting the peace and undermining the HOA's authority." Jake stood up, his voice steady. "I'm not here to cause chaos. I'm here because my rights are being ignored. If we can't even agree on something as simple as a driveway, how do we expect to live together?" The room murmured agreement. Karen's tone hardened. "Rules are rules. If you don't like them, you can take it up with the board." Jake smiled slightly. "I'm doing just that." As the meeting dragged on, the tension thickened. Some neighbors voiced support for Jake, sharing their own frustrations with Karen's strict rule enforcement. Others sided with Karen, fearing the HOA's power might weaken. The climax came when Jake proposed a community vote on the driveway issue, calling for transparency and fairness. Karen's face reddened. "You can't just put board decisions to a vote." "We can if the board isn't listening to its members," Jake replied. The room was silent for a moment, then buzzed with whispers and nods. Outside, the neighborhood's attitude was shifting. The bow on Karen's car wasn't just a prank, it had become a symbol of resistance. As Jake left the meeting, he received a text from an unknown number. You've made enemies, Jake. Watch your back. He pocketed the phone and took a deep breath. This fight was far from over. But one thing was clear. Jake was no longer alone. The sun was setting over Cedar Creek Estates, casting a warm glow on the quiet street where Jake Matthews lived. But the neighborhood wasn't so quiet anymore. Jake's bold move with Karen's car had stirred something beneath the surface. After the tense HOA meeting, Jake felt a spark of hope and a plan. He decided to host a block party, not just any gathering, but one meant to bring neighbors together, show community spirit, and maybe just maybe remind Karen what this neighborhood was really about. He spread the word quietly, knocking on doors, chatting with neighbors, and inviting anyone who wanted to break the ice. Many hesitated, worried about Karen's reaction, but a handful eagerly accepted. The day of the party, Jake and Lisa set up tables with snacks and drinks, colorful banners, and string lights. Kids played in the street. Laughter bubbled from every corner. But Karen wasn't happy. Around noon, a sharp knock on Jake's door interrupted the festivities. It was Karen, clipboard in hand, face tight. "Jake," she said briskly, "you don't have permission for this gathering. It violates HOA rules about street use and noise." Jake smiled calmly. "Karen, this is a neighborhood event. We've all been cooped up with your driveway battle. Maybe it's time to lighten up." Karen's eyes flashed. "Rules are rules. I'm issuing fines to anyone participating." Jake's smile faded. The stakes just got higher. Word spread quickly, and suddenly neighbors were caught in the middle. Some threatened to leave, afraid of penalties. Others decided to stand with Jake, showing up in greater numbers. Tensions rose like a storm ready to break. Late afternoon, Karen appeared again, this time with a stern warning that she'd be enforcing fines and possibly legal action. The atmosphere thickened, neighbors whispering anxiously. But Jake stood firm. He raised his voice so all could hear. "We're neighbors, not adversaries. If Karen thinks fines will scare us off, she's wrong. We're here to show that community means more than rules on paper." A ripple of applause followed. Suddenly, from the crowd, a voice spoke up. It was Tom, Jake's longtime friend. "I've had my share of run-ins with Karen," Tom said, looking directly at her. "But this fight, it's about respect. Maybe it's time the HOA listened to us, instead of just dictating." More neighbors nodded, gaining courage. Karen's jaw clenched. She looked around, realizing she wasn't in control anymore. But then she pulled out a new cargo letter threatening Jake with legal action for disturbing the peace. The crowd hushed. Jake felt the pressure mounting. Lisa grabbed his hand. "We've got to be ready for anything." The block party ended that evening with mixed feelings, some joy, some uncertainty. But one thing was clear. Karen's iron grip was slipping. That night, Jake stayed up late, drafting an email to a local legal aid group specializing in HOA disputes. He needed advice and fast. The next morning, a mysterious package arrived on his porch. Inside was a thick envelope marked confidential. Opening it, Jake's eyes widened. Inside were old documents, property deeds, maps, and letters dating back decades, clearly proving that his driveway was indeed private property, not HOA land. The game had changed. But Jake knew Karen wouldn't give up without a fight. Just then, his phone buzzed with a new text. "You think you've won. This is far from over." Jake's jaw tightened. The neighborhood was watching. The stakes were higher than ever. Would he use this new evidence to finally put an end to the dispute? Or was Karen ready to escalate to a level no one expected? The morning after receiving the old documents that proved his driveway was private property, Jake Matthews felt a surge of hope. Finally, tangible proof that Karen's claim was baseless. He shared the news quietly with Lisa and Tom, determined to use the evidence to end the fight once and for all. But Karen Whitman wasn't ready to give up. In fact, her next move would shock the neighborhood and nearly bring the entire battle to a breaking point. Later that day, Jake returned home from work to find a bright yellow notice slapped on his windshield. It read, "Final warning, your vehicle is subject to towing if parked on HOA property." Jake's stomach tightened. Then he noticed 3 towing company trucks parked at the end of the street. Their engines idling. Karen was escalating. This wasn't just about signs or fines anymore. She was trying to physically remove his car. Without hesitation, Jake grabbed his phone and started recording. Every moment counted. As the tow truck drivers approached his minivan, Jake stepped outside, phone in hand, calmly speaking into the camera. "Hey, I'm Jake Matthews. This is my vehicle, parked legally on a public street. There's been no court order or police involvement authorizing this tow. Please stop." One driver looked hesitant, but the other shrugged. "We've got a contract with the HOA. We're just doing our job." Jake kept filming, speaking clearly for evidence. "If you tow this car, you're towing it illegally." At that moment, a crowd of neighbors began gathering, curious about the commotion. Some whispered, some shook their heads disapprovingly. Suddenly, Tom appeared from across the street, holding his phone. "I'm live streaming this. The whole neighborhood's watching." The tension thickened as the tow drivers exchanged uncertain looks. The lead driver sighed and backed off. Jake lowered his phone and smiled, though adrenaline still coursed through him. Later, Karen stormed out of the HOA office, furious that her plan had failed publicly. Rumors spread that she'd threatened legal action against Jake for harassment. But the damage was done. Her harsh tactics had turned the neighborhood firmly against her. That evening, Jake uploaded the video of the tow attempt to the neighborhood's social media group. It quickly racked up hundreds of views and sparked a flood of supportive comments. One neighbor wrote, "Karen's overreach is out of control. Thanks for standing up for all of us." Jake, another, said, "This is exactly why people fear HOA letters' abuse of power." Jake felt both relieved and wary. He knew Karen wasn't done. Her threats were growing more serious. The next morning, a legal letter arrived from the HOA's lawyer, demanding Jake cease and desist all unauthorized use of HOA property, and threatening fines up to $5,000 per day if he didn't comply. Jake showed the letter to his friend, Mike, a local attorney who had helped others with HOA disputes. Mike frowned. "They're trying to intimidate you. But with those old property documents, you've got a strong case. You just need to make sure you respond properly and keep everything documented." Jake nodded. "I'm ready for whatever's next." But even with legal backup, the constant pressure was wearing on him. The neighborhood was divided, and some longtime friends were hesitant to get involved. Late that night, Jake received another text. "Watch your back, Jake. Not everyone's on your side." The warning felt colder this time. Was it just Karen's doing, or was someone else lurking behind the scenes, despite the growing threat? Jake knew one thing for sure. He couldn't stop now. He was fighting not just for his driveway, but for the neighborhood's future. If you think Jake showed real courage standing up to that tow truck, hit the like button and comment if you've ever caught someone in the act. The tension in Cedar Creek Estates had reached a boiling point. After Karen's failed tow attempt and the whole lawyer's heavy-handed threats, Jake Matthews knew it was time to stop fighting blindly and come armed with the facts. He sat down at his kitchen table late one evening, surrounded by the old property, deeds, survey maps, and legal documents that had mysteriously arrived days earlier. There was something special buried in those papers, something that could turn the entire battle in his favor. With the help of Mike, his trusted local attorney friend, Jake pored over every line. The documents painted a clear picture. His driveway was officially part of his property. The HOA had no legal right to claim it as common property or block him from using it. Mike nodded approvingly. These records are solid, Jake. The HOA's position is weak if you push back with this, but you need to make your move carefully. Follow procedure, keep everything documented, and don't let Karen catch you off guard. Jake agreed. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about showing that fairness and respect mattered. If Karen thought she could bully him with rules and threats, she was about to learn a hard lesson. The very next day, Jake sent a formal letter to the HOA board, attaching copies of the deeds and survey maps. The letter was clear and polite, demanding that the HOA retract the parking restrictions immediately and remove all no parking signs from his driveway. He also requested a meeting with the board to discuss the situation openly. In front of neighbors. Almost immediately, the neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. Rumors spread that the HOA was scrambling behind the scenes, trying to figure out how to respond. For the first time, Karen seemed less confident. Meanwhile, Jake's phone kept buzzing. Neighbors reached out, many expressing support and admiration for his stand. Even some who had stayed silent began to ask questions, wondering if they might also challenge Karen's strict rules. But just as Jake felt the tide turning, the HOA's response arrived, a short letter dismissing his claims, insisting that the driveway was HOA property and that the board's decision was final. Jake sighed, but wasn't discouraged. This wasn't over. The scheduled HOA board meeting soon arrived, and the community center filled with curious residents. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Jake stood confidently at the front, ready to present his evidence. Karen sat near the board table, her eyes cold and calculating as Jake laid out his case, the deeds, the surveys, the history. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Neighbors leaned in, clearly impressed. Then, just as Karen opened her mouth to respond, something unexpected happened. A woman in the back, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Jenkins, stood up. Known for keeping to herself, she rarely spoke at meetings. "I've lived here for over 30 years," Mrs. Jenkins said, her voice steady. "I remember when the Matthews driveway was built. It was always part of his property. The HOA's claim is new and unjust." Her words carried weight, and others nodded in agreement. Karen's expression darkened. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Jake could feel the momentum shifting, but Karen wasn't ready to concede. She attempted to discredit the documents and Mrs. Jenkins' testimony, accusing Jake of stirring trouble and disrespecting HOA rules. The room grew louder. Neighbors debating, some defending Jake, others reluctant but doubtful. The board chair finally called for order and suggested a formal vote to reconsider the driveways. Jake held his breath. The votes were counted, and the result was clear. The board agreed to recognize Jake's driveway as private property, and the no parking signs were ordered removed immediately. The room erupted in applause. Karen sat silently, defeated but not broken. As Jake packed up his papers, his phone buzzed again. Another message appeared. "You think you've won? Watch carefully. This is just the beginning." Jake smiled, a mix of relief and steely resolve washing over him. He had won a major battle, but the war with Karen and the HOA was far from finished. The big day had arrived. The Cedar Creek Estates Community Center was packed. Neighbors had come in droves, buzzing with anticipation. Everyone wanted to witness the showdown between Jake Matthews and Karen Whitman, the HOA president who had held the neighborhood in her grip for months. Jake stood near the front, calm but ready. He had come armed with facts, neighborhood support, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd fought hard and wasn't about to give up. Karen, seated at The board table wore a tight smile that barely concealed her frustration. Over the past weeks, her control had slipped, but she wasn't ready to admit defeat. The meeting opened with the HOA board chair welcoming everyone. Then the floor was handed over to Jake. He took a deep breath. "Thank you all for coming. This fight has been about more than just a driveway. It's about fairness, respect, and standing up for what's right." Jake laid out his case methodically, showing the old property deeds, the survey maps, and reading Mrs. Jenkins' testimony aloud for the gathered neighbors. The crowd murmured in agreement. Several neighbors nodded and whispered to each other, their support clear. Karen tried to interrupt, but the chair reminded her to wait her turn. When Karen finally spoke, her tone was sharp. "This isn't just about property lines. Jake's behavior, his pranks, the block party disruption, even the filming of the tow truck has caused division and chaos in our community." Jake shook his head. "Karen, I'm here because the rules were used to bully and intimidate. When I tried to talk, I was shut down. I'm not the problem." Tensions rose. Some neighbors defended Karen's strictness, but many more voiced their frustration with her leadership. Then, just as the meeting seemed ready to spiral, a surprise happened. A man Jake hadn't met before stood up, a quiet figure who had stayed mostly on the sidelines. His name was Eric, a longtime resident and a respected local surveyor. Eric cleared his throat and addressed the room. "I reviewed the documents and visited the property. I can confirm that Jake's driveway is clearly on his private land. The HOA's claim lacks legal backing." The crowd reacted audibly. Even Karen looked taken aback. The board chair called for calm and proposed a formal vote to resolve the dispute once and for all. Before voting, Karen made one last attempt. "I urge you to consider the bigger picture. This fight has torn us apart. Let's think carefully about community harmony." Jake countered, "True harmony comes from fairness, not fear." The votes were cast. Hands rose to recognize Jake's driveway as private property. The decision was unanimous. Karen's face paled. She stood abruptly and left the room without a word. The neighbors cheered. The victory was theirs. Jake breathed a sigh of relief, but knew this was just one battle won in a longer war outside. As the crowd dispersed, Jake's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. "Well played, Jake. But don't think Karen's done yet." Jake smiled. Whatever came next, he was ready. The neighborhood of Cedar Creek Estates was buzzing with celebration. After months of tension, protests, and standoffs, Jake Matthews had finally won his fight against the HOA's overreach. The board's decision was clear. His driveway was his own, no longer claimed by Karen Whitman or the HOA. Jake's driveway signs came down that very afternoon. The no parking cones vanished. The street, once a battleground, was peaceful again. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate him. Old Mrs. Jenkins brought over homemade cookies, and even some who had stayed quiet throughout now smiled in support. Jake and Lisa sat on their porch that evening, watching the sunset with a sense of relief. "It feels like the neighborhood can breathe again," Lisa said softly. Jake nodded, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "We stood up and made a difference. This was never just about a driveway. It was about standing up for fairness and community." But just as Jake thought the storm had passed, his phone buzzed with a new message. From an unknown number: "You won the battle, but the war is far from over. Watch your driveway tomorrow morning." A chill ran down Jake's spine. He showed Lisa the message, and they exchanged worried looks. That night, Jake barely slept. What could the message mean? Had Karen given up? Or was this the beginning of something new? The next morning, Jake stepped outside to check on his driveway, only to freeze in disbelief. There, Parked smack in the middle of his driveway was Karen's black SUV. But it wasn't just parked, it was covered in a massive, bright red bow. Attached was a note, "A gift for you. Enjoy your driveway while it lasts." Jake couldn't help but laugh, despite the tension. Karen's audacity was legendary, but this prank showed she wasn't ready to surrender. Neighbors gathered, some shaking their heads in amusement, others looking concerned. Jake took a picture and posted it on the neighborhood social media page with the caption, "Karen's final bow. The driveway is mine, but the neighborhood spirit is what really won." The post went viral locally. People admired Jake's calm humor in the face of Karen's antics. In the days that followed, the atmosphere shifted again. Karen, despite losing the official fight, continued to push small boundary tests, new signs here, complaints there, but the neighborhood no longer feared her. Jake had become a symbol of standing firm and using wit as well as law to fight back. One afternoon, the HOA board called a special meeting and, in a surprising move, voted Karen out as president, replacing her with a neighbor known for fairness and listening. With Karen gone, peace slowly returned to Cedar Creek Estates. Jake and Lisa hosted a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate, inviting everyone who had supported the fight. As the sun set and laughter filled the air, Jake looked around at his friends and neighbors. He realized this fight wasn't just about a driveway. It was about reclaiming a community. If you enjoyed this story of resilience, justice, and a little humor, please hit like, subscribe, and share it with friends who need to hear that sometimes standing up can change everything. And remember, no matter how tough the fight, a little cleverness and courage can make all the difference. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us why community matters.